Hey everyone, welcome back. So today we are doing a deep dive on something pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And that's all about eye contact.
Uh-huh.
Specifically, how it plays out for adults on the autism spectrum.
Right. Yeah.
It's one of those things that I think a lot of people take for granted.
Uh-huh.
But this blog post, Adult Autism, Eye Contact, and the social spectrum that you sent me
Yeah.
really opened my eyes to how much I didn't know about this.
Yeah, it's definitely a topic that I think needs more discussion, for sure.
Yeah.
And one of the things that is so interesting about that specific blog post is it really emphasizes the spectrum part of autism.
Right.
It's not a one-size-fits-all when it comes to eye contact.
Right.
Some autistic people might completely avoid it,
Uh-huh.
while others might actually hold your gaze for what feels like an eternity.
That's such a good point, and it's really easy to jump to conclusions like what
Yeah.
those behaviors mean.
Right.
But it sounds like the reality is way more complex than that.
It is, yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
There's a real neurological basis for this variation.
Okay.
So for some people on the spectrum, think about what it's like to be in a crowded, noisy room
Right.
where every single sensation feels amplified.
Uh-huh.
That's kind of what sensory overload can be like.
Okay.
And adding direct eye contact on top of that can just be super intense.
Yeah.
It's like adding another layer of information
Right.
that their nervous system is really struggling to process.
Right.
So avoiding eye contact can be a way to kind of like
Okay.
regulate that sensory input.
That's making me think about like when someone is standing too close to me
yeah.
during a conversation
Hmm.
and I just like get distracted
Yeah,
and it makes it really hard to focus on what they're saying.
totally.
And I'm just imagining how much more intense that would be.
Yeah.
For someone who has sensory sensitivities.
Exactly. And then on the flip side, you have situations
Okay.
where someone on the spectrum might actually use more intense eye contact.
Right.
And this could be their way of compensating
Okay.
for challenges with other social cues.
Oh.
So it's like they're over-focusing on one aspect
Okay.
to make up for difficulties in other areas.
So it's almost like both avoiding and prolonging eye contact can be coping mechanisms,
Yeah.
but just expressed in different ways.
Exactly.
Wow.
And I think that's where the big potential for misinterpretation comes in.
Uh-huh.
Because neurotypical folks tend to have pretty fixed ideas
Right.
about what eye contact signifies.
Totally. It's like we've been conditioned to think like, no eye contact, they must be bored or lying.
Yeah.
Or like intense stare, watch out, this person's about to snap.
Exactly. And the blog post really highlights how these neurotypical assumptions
Uh-huh.
can lead to all sorts of misjudgments and communication breakdowns.
Which is making me wonder,
Yeah.
what are some like common situations where these kinds of misunderstandings about eye contact tend to happen?
Well, just think about something like a job interview.
Okay.
A neurotypical interviewer might interpret a lack of eye contact from an autistic candidate as like a sign of disinterest or even disrespect.
Oh, wow. That's a really good example because the stakes are so high in that setting
Totally.
that it could easily lead to someone being unfairly judged
Yeah.
based on that simple misunderstanding.
Exactly. Or even in like more casual social situations.
Yeah.
Like someone might try to initiate a conversation with an autistic individual who avoids eye contact.
Yeah.
And they might misunderstand that avoidance as like rejection or rudeness,
Right.
when really it's just a way of managing their sensory input or their social anxiety.
Yeah, I've definitely been in situations where I've felt uncomfortable with someone's level of eye contact,
Uh,
but I never stopped to think that it might be tied to something like
yeah.
sensory overload or just a different way of experiencing social interaction.
Yeah, it's so easy to fall back on our own assumptions.
Right.
But the more we learn about these differences,
Uh-huh.
the better equipped we are to communicate effectively and compassionately.
So how can we use this knowledge to bridge that communication gap?
Yeah.
It sounds like the blog post mentioned a few strategies for navigating these differences.
It does, yeah, and they're really practical too.
Okay.
Things like practicing eye contact in safe environments,
Uh-huh.
using visual aids, and gradually increasing the duration of eye contact over time.
Those make a lot of sense to me, but before we dive into those,
Yeah.
I think it's super important to emphasize what the blog post said about never forcing eye contact.
Right.
It's about respecting individual preferences and creating a safe space
Yes.
for communication and not imposing our own expectations on people.
Absolutely. Forcing eye contact can be incredibly anxiety-provoking
Right.
for someone on the spectrum.
Yeah.
And it totally defeats the purpose of building understanding and connection.
So instead of focusing solely on eye contact,
Yeah.
maybe we should be thinking more broadly about all the ways we communicate non-verbally.
Or
Like,
so.
what are some other things we can pay attention to?
Well, body language is huge.
Oh.
Like, are they leaning in or are they pulling back?
Mm-hmm.
Are their arms crossed or are they gesturing openly? And then there's tone of voice. Like, are they speaking really quickly and excitedly or more slowly and thoughtfully? All of these can give you clues about how someone is feeling and how they're engaging in the conversation.
It's like we're expanding our definition of what it means to even be present in a conversation.
Yeah.
It's not just about making eye contact.
Right.
It's about being attuned to all these subtle cues.
Exactly. And that's where those strategies from the blog post can come in.
Okay.
They're all about creating a more flexible and accommodating communication style.
So let's dive into those then.
Yeah.
The first one was practicing eye contact in safe environments.
Uh-huh.
Can you elaborate on what that actually looks like?
Sure. Think of it like any other skill you're trying to learn.
Okay.
You wouldn't expect to be a pro overnight
Right.
if eye contact is something that causes you anxiety.
Yeah.
Starting with short periods of eye contact with people you trust,
Yep.
like family members, close friends, that can really help build confidence
Right.
and reduce those feelings of overwhelm.
So it's a gradually desensitizing yourself
Yeah.
to something that initially feels uncomfortable.
Exactly. And then you can slowly increase the duration and the range of people that you practice with.
The blog post also mentioned using visual aids.
Yeah.
I was kind of curious about how that works in practice.
So imagine you're having a conversation with someone,
Okay.
and instead of looking directly into their eyes,
Yeah.
you're both focusing on a shared object,
Okay.
maybe a photograph, a drawing, or even a fidget toy.
Okay.
It gives your eyes a place to rest without feeling like you're completely disengaging from the interaction.
Oh, I see. So it's like you have this visual anchor
Yeah.
that can help you stay grounded and focused,
Mhm.
even if the direct eye contact is too intense.
Exactly. And it can be really helpful for people who are sensitive to visual stimulation
Right.
because it allows them to participate in the conversation
Mm.
without feeling overloaded.
That makes sense. And then the third strategy was gradually increasing the duration of eye contact over time,
Uh-huh.
which seems to kind of tie back to the idea of like building that comfort and confidence gradually.
Yeah, it's not about forcing anyone to do anything they're not ready for.
Right.
It's about starting with small, manageable steps
Mm.
and slowly expanding those comfort zones.
So maybe starting with a quick glance
Yeah,
and then holding the gaze for a couple of seconds and building from there.
exactly. It's all about finding a pace that feels right for that individual.
Right.
And remember, even a slight increase in eye contact
Uh-huh.
can be a huge accomplishment for someone who finds it really challenging.
It's about progress, not perfection.
Exactly.
And, you know, I think it's also important to point out that these strategies aren't just for autistic individuals. Like, they could be helpful for anyone who struggles with eye contact for any reason,
Yeah.
whether it's social anxiety, cultural differences, or just like personal preference. That's a really good point because we've been talking a lot about the differences
Yeah.
between neurotypical and autistic communication styles.
Uh-huh.
But ultimately, these strategies are about creating a more inclusive and flexible communication environment for everyone.
I couldn't agree more.
Mm.
It's about recognizing that there's no one right way to communicate
Yeah.
and that we can all benefit from being more adaptable and understanding.
So to bring it back to our listener,
Yeah.
what is one practical thing that they can take away from this conversation and start implementing today?
I would say the most important takeaway is just to be mindful of your own assumptions about eye contact.
Okay.
The next time you're interacting with someone
Mm-hmm.
and they're not making eye contact in the way you might expect,
Yeah.
pause for a moment before jumping to conclusions.
Right.
Remember that there could be a whole variety of reasons for that behavior,
Uh-huh.
and it may have nothing to do with their level of respect for you
Right.
or their interest in what you have to say.
That's such a powerful reminder.
Yeah.
It's so easy to let our own biases and expectations
Mm-hmm.
color our perceptions.
Uh-huh.
But taking that moment to pause and consider other possibilities can make a huge difference in how we communicate.
For sure. And it opens up the possibility for a much richer and more meaningful connection.
This has been such an insightful conversation. I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on something I thought I understood.
Yeah.
What is one final thought you'd like to leave our listener with on this topic?
You know, if this deep dive has kind of piqued your interest,
Okay.
I'd highly recommend
Uh-huh.
checking out the concept of double empathy.
Double empathy.
Yeah, it's this framework
Okay.
that suggests that communication difficulties between autistic and neurotypical people
Uh-huh.
often happen not because one group is like deficient,
Right.
but because they're both
Mm-hmm.
experiencing and perceiving the world
Right.
in fundamentally different ways.
So instead of putting the burden of adaptation just on autistic people,
Yeah,
it's more about encouraging both sides to bridge that understanding gap.
exactly. It challenges the assumption that there's one normal way of communicating,
Right.
and it encourages us to be more flexible and accommodating.
I love that.
Yeah,
It's like learning a new language almost.
it is.
Like you have to be willing to meet in the middle
Uh-huh.
and make an effort to understand the other person's perspective.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And just like learning any new language, it takes time and patience
Right.
and a willingness to step outside your comfort zone.
For sure. But the rewards are huge.
Yeah.
When you can communicate with someone who experiences the world so differently than you,
Totally.
it just opens up a whole world of understanding and connection.
It really does.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation.
Yeah, me too.
I feel like I've learned so much about a topic I thought I already understood,
Uh-huh.
which is a good reminder that there's always more to learn.
Yes, always.
And that being open to different perspectives can enrich our lives in so many ways.
For sure.
So to kind of wrap things up here.
Yeah.
It sounds like the key takeaway is that eye contact is really just one small piece
Right.
of the communication puzzle.
Uh-huh.
And while it's often seen as like a universal sign of engagement,
Yeah.
we need to be aware that it can be experienced really differently by people on the autism spectrum.
Absolutely. And instead of getting hung up on those differences,
Yeah.
we can focus on creating a communication environment
Uh-huh.
that is flexible, accommodating, and respectful of everyone's needs.
And whether it's practicing eye contact in safe environments,
Yeah.
using visual aids, or just being more mindful of our assumptions.
Right.
There are so many ways we can bridge that understanding gap.
Absolutely.
And remember, these strategies aren't just for interacting with autistic individuals.
Mm.
They can be helpful for anyone who struggles with eye contact, or any other aspect of communication for that matter.
Exactly.
It's all about being more aware, more adaptable, and
Yeah.
more compassionate in all of our interactions. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this journey of discovery.
Yeah, this is great.
Until next time, keep those questions coming
Uh-huh.
and keep exploring